War and conflict is one of our oldest habits. In today's modern world, we know the cost of war all too well. Death, grief, fear, and wounds, both physical and spiritual, that survive long after the people carrying them are gone. Throughout history, there have always been those who stood against this habit, doing everything in their hand to prevent such a destructive reality from coming back into our lives. However, across decades, continents, and political systems, war has returned again and again, in different moments, in different regions, with different justifications by old men. In our modern world, millions of us live with the privilege of living through a long lasting peace, especially in the political West, and therefore we have seemed to have forgotten what war can do to us and our community. Great people, both past and present, have tried their best to show us the true cost of war through different forms of media: movies, series, paintings, novels, theater plays, and they all did so just to cry never again. To come to the point of this video essay, video games are a rather young form of art, but even in its short life, this art form has seen an incredible amount of work that focuses on war and conflict. While many video games have focused on the visual spectacle and adrenaline rush of the moment, some developers of this genre have used the unique interactive nature of this medium to shout their own cries. In this video, we will be analyzing how these art pieces show us the horrors of war in their own unique and often haunting ways. As we have discussed, there are many games out there that have shown the horrors of war to us. To understand and dissect in detail how these stories are told and how they are trying to convey their heavy message to us, we need a starting point. Well, where else could we possibly begin but at the very center of action and destruction?
The rotten cancer of the fascist Reich ravages Europe like a plague. The relentless drive into our motherland steals the lives of men, women, and children alike. The arrogance of their leaders is matched only by the brutality of their soldiers. These are the darkest days of the Nazi occupation of Stalingrad.
Call of Duty World at War has been praised for years for its portrayal of war, and, to be honest, deservedly so. While the American campaign does showcase the technological marvels and the human ingenuity when it comes to ways to kill one another, the Soviet campaign marvels at showcasing the brutality of the Eastern Front. You start the campaign with heavy breaths lying down around your dead brethren in a fountain in the fabled city of Stalingrad. Even before you can recover and get a hold of yourself, you are a witness to a massacre. You see Nazi soldiers shooting your wounded brothers in cold blood. Simply, you are at the short end of a massacre. In seconds after you gain control of your character, you meet Sergeant Reznov, who is more than a side character. He is the great orator of this campaign. He exists to give voice to the rage, the brutality, and the desire for revenge of himself, of millions of soldiers, and of a nation against another nation for the crimes it committed in its homeland. The game is not subtle in this portrayal as well. That mission is called Vendetta, and that is the whole premise of the campaign. You are there to be a witness and be part of the unstoppable Soviet force that is about to overrun Germany and take their revenge. This first mission's role in the story is really simple. It is there to explain why the Soviet soldiers will be bloodthirsty in the upcoming missions. Meanwhile, Reznov is there to justify it and even humanize it. Yes, I mean it, humanize it. The game does this by combining two different storytelling tools that are rather oxymoronic side by side. Reznov is a capable, sane, and collected man, explaining what is going on at the moment with a calm manner in whispers. At the same time, You are surrounded by enemies in a city that is painted ash gray, whose buildings are in ruins, and you are lying amongst your dead brothers and sisters. In such a scenario, the expected human behavior is outrage that we are about to witness in the upcoming missions. This is where the brilliance of this campaign shines through. It would have been so easy to make Reznov and you be the two-man wonder squad beating the Nazi army, while having Reznov be an angry man running with emotions. However, Reznov's calm and collected nature throughout this mission is the proof to the player that this man is not led ahead with emotions. He is there to rationalize what's coming, and he does that amazingly as well. I mean, props to the writers and the voice actor. Just listen to these two sections, which happens right at the start of the mission.
Momodak in the car is General Heinrich Hamsel, architect of Stalingrad's misery. He is responsible for the cold-blooded murder of men, women, and children. Not just here, but throughout the motherland. For days, I have crept through shadows like a rat. This place once echoed with conversations of friends and lovers. No longer. Mark my words, comrade. One day things will change. We will take the fight to their land, to their people, to their blood.
As you are crawling among your fallen brothers and walking through the ruins of Stalingrad, Reznov is walking you through the trial that the Soviet people had run in their minds. Every one of them considered the case, weighed the possible judgments, and came up with only one just punishment: revenge itself. For the remainder of the mission, you are not mostly running and gunning through the enemy lines. Most of the time, you are outnumbered and forced to run away in treacherous conditions. This fact does portray two different messages that are important to showcase the horrors of war. Firstly, it is there to remind you how brutal the Nazi army was against the Soviet people, destroying building after building, burning out another one just to kill a couple stragglers, lining up soldiers who have surrendered and straight out executing them. Secondly, this is the foundation upon which the game is trying to build the moral ambiguity of this conflict. You are running away from a massacre now, but when the Soviets have the upper hand, this mission is there to make you feel justified. You may object to the revenge this game is preparing you for. You may not want to be part of what is to come, yet you do not matter. You have no choice on what is to happen. This is the second important function of this mission. It is informing you about the collective decision of this nation. The verdict is clear. There is nothing but revenge to be had. The individual soldier, especially the player, does not have a choice. Everyone is simply executing the verdict that has been decided. This is what war does to people. It strips you of your individuality. When war falls upon a nation, the person is forced to become a cog in a machine that expects everything but listens to no criticism. This is the fundamental effect of war that should be feared. People have taken actions that they wouldn't have done normally due to the side effect of war. The mob mentality that forms during wartime can justify many unimaginable horrors, and we are here to witness what war can achieve with this reality on its side. This has been the usual defense of the Nazi leadership during their trial. People had to deconstruct this argument and show them how inhumane their own behavior was. This campaign doesn't stop there as well. Right in the next Soviet mission, we meet another side character that is there to drive this point home: Private Cherno. He's just another private like the one you are playing, and he's constantly objecting to the brutality his comrades are showing. However, he is constantly being criticized and ridiculed by Reznov whenever he shares his opinion. Cherno is there to be the consciousness of the common man, and showcase how that consciousness and desire for dignity was silenced within the ever-hungry mission of war.
Chernov! I am not hearing gunshots!
There is no point, Sergeant. They are already bleeding to death.
Then maybe our friend will help them bleed faster.
This way! Into the building! There! Got it! Drops rivals!
These animals hate and marauded their way through the motherland without mercy. They deserve none in return.
Sie mich nicht!
He wants mercy. You do not deserve mercy. What mercy did you show to our people? Die. Wait. He may come help us. He can die for us. Mudak! This is not war. This is murder.
This is how you end a war, Chernobyl!
The excellence of this campaign is that it showcases and introduces all these mechanics and dynamics within 10 to 20 minutes of the whole campaign. There's a great saying that is attributed to many clever minds. If I had time, I would have written a shorter letter. This campaign is that short letter. It has been written with time and attention to detail and has been written to be effective at every second and with every scene. You might be walking from one building to another, basically walking from one encounter to another one. It could have been a simple walk with no messages, yet the game does not waste even that moment. It openly shows you how the Soviet soldiers are executing the surrendering German ones in revenge, just like in Stalingrad. Once war catches momentum, there's nothing you, me, and anyone can do to stop its destructive ways from destroying the lives of millions. It leaves communities and countries in ruins behind its trail. Once a community decides that war is essential for revenge or for survival, the voice and the morality of the individual is silenced by the roar of the machine. This is the tragedy the Soviet campaign is trying its everything to portray. By the time we are atop the Reichstag, planting the Soviet flag surrounded by the heroes of our brothers in arms, the proclaimed Vendetta is complete. But the cost of it all is humanity itself. The campaign leads us to a chilling conclusion. We are all capable of becoming cogs of the war machine. Humanity is capable of silencing its inner morality to satisfy the feeling of revenge in our hearts. The horrors of war might have been shown through the Battle of Stalingrad or Berlin. However, the real horror shown is how drastically war can change humanity. One can analyze the Soviet campaign for longer than I did here, and sections of the American campaign certainly deserve their own credit as well. The whole game in its entirety deserves a deep dive video essay of its own that I might do in the future. However, there are more aspects and layers to the horrors of war that need to be discussed that other games portray perfectly. Before we move on, I would like to focus on one last masterstroke of this game's design. The introduction to the campaign and mission uses real war footage and has been designed to mimic a short documentary in a uniquely characterized style. This creative decision is not there to be a stylistic gimmick or a way to fill the loading screen time. It is there deliberately to ground the player to the reality and history. It is there to remind you all that all of this was real. Dmitry, Reznov, and everyone else we encounter might be fictional, but the foundation this campaign built upon is history. I will be quoting Tim O'Brien to finally move on to the next game. In the things they carried, he delivered this masterpiece. A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of residue has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There's no residue whatsoever, there's no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to the obscenity and evil. This quote has been used by Actman while analyzing Call of Duty World at War. However, it does match with the tone of this game and campaign so much that I did not want to shy away from using it. While World at War shows us the Grand Portals in an amazing tone, I would like to look into the little details most of the time that goes unnoticed. I have already alluded to the fact that war does hurt the individual and communities in ways that keeps its wounds alive for generations. Valiant Hearts does portray and touch with a unique artistic design to the individual stories. Most often than not, these individual stories are lost in the midst of the discussion and they deserve the attention the whole picture gets. If Word at War is about the complete silence of the individual in the roaring engine of War Machine, then our next entry is about the desperate struggle to keep a resemblance of individual agency while being consumed by the same machine. Most war stories are told through the lens of generals and movements of armies, shifting lens of territory that represent thousands of lives lost for a few inches of mud. Even if the wounds of war are mentioned in these works through the diary of a soldier or the grim depiction of life in the trenches, most often than not, they are a side note. Valiant Hearts rejects this narration style. In this game, the individual story of families broken apart, letters written in desperate hope, and the quiet struggle for dignity are no longer footnotes of history. They are the main story. While War That War showed us the ever-hungry war machine roaring, Valiant Hearts focuses on people trying to avoid its wrath. Valiant Hearts' ingenuity when it comes to portrayal of individual tragedy is impeccable in my opinion. Not just because the individual stories it tells are interesting and inspired by history itself, but also because it does this while portraying the immense cost of lives and the destruction of the Western Front in World War I at the same time. You are once again in the middle of the action, being a participant of the war as much as the characters in the World at War were. However, the distinction is clear. You are not the Soviet private Dmitri, accompanied by the Soviet Sergeant Reznov. You are Emil, a grandfather who is trying passionately and wholeheartedly to reunite his family that was torn apart. Not the French recruit old guy Emil. You are Karl, a young man forced out of his town and country, separated from his family, not just a German recruit. You are Anna, a stubborn, determined, and scholarly woman searching for his father amidst the front line, not an ordinary nurse. You are Freddy, the grieving husband, not just another American volunteer. Both world wars have changed our world in such ways that it is quite hard to grasp how life would have been if they did not happen at all. Both wars have ended empires and from their ashes rose new ones to power. Nations living under the empire's regime gained their independence and autonomy to rule themselves. These wars determined the cultural background of many countries and millions of people. However, for most of the individuals affected by these big wars, when they were raging on, these grand results or the plans of the masters of said war did not matter. For many of them, what mattered was survival of their own, survival of their loved ones. It was the letter that has arrived from home, from loved ones, the letter sent home to tell them what's going on and how they are hoping to be back one day. For many, it was the effort to keep that one more wounded man alive, even against all the odds and against the insanity going on all around them. For many, it was about suffering through the bureaucratic rifts that have been created by borders on a map, even against their will. Valiant Hearts does portray the efforts and hopes of millions that lived almost 100 years ago to appreciate their efforts on the 100th anniversary of that tragedy. Valiant Hearts is valuable as a game because it has been crafted to honor the forgotten millions, not to entertain. It isn't there to glorify or show the victory of one nation on another one. It asks us to be a witness to the individual tragedy. I have appreciated how World at War ties the gameplay and its portrayal of the historical reality, and the oxymoronic nature of Reznov and its effective storytelling role. Well, to say the least, Valiant Hearts is not bested by its fellow art piece on this endeavor as well. The most noticeable design choice is its artistic style. It utilizes a visual design that would have been charming, gentle, and even comforting if it was used to depict any other story. The characters within it are unique in their own way and the environments are rather simplified. The overall aesthetic is far removed from the gritty realism that we are accustomed with when it comes to war stories. This is the ironic depiction that I love about Valiant Hearts, as the art style may seem gentle and approachable. It feels like it is there to tell a comfortable, happy story about a couple go-getters. However, every section of the story tells a completely and consistently different story of destruction, loss, and chaos. Whenever we are trying to solve puzzles and move through the sections in small environments, in the background there's that battlefield filled with the wounded and the dead, cities and buildings in ruins, and civilians seeking help caught in crossfire. Yes, Valiant Hearts is there to tell the stories of millions of individuals that are forgotten and often lost within the history. However, it does not forget to portray the grand picture from start to finish as well. Even while we are invested in what will happen to Emil, Carl, Anna, and Freddy, we are also shown the story of World War I from the declaration of the war and the subsequent separation of communities to the closing chapter of the war with the American involvement. This is the crucial game design choice. As I pointed out once earlier, most war stories do touch on the individual suffering through the letters of the soldiers and memoirs while focusing on the grand picture. Well, Valiant Hearts is the perfect asymmetry of that structure. It is focusing on the individual and does portray the overall misery by simply keeping us attached to it constantly. This, combined with its gentle art style, makes it surprisingly effective. It is not loud and visually tiresome. Its gentle tones does portray the grand misery in an elegant way. Additionally, the game ties itself to reality through the use of collectibles, postcards, short descriptions, and factual notes, putting emphasis on one certain aspect of that war throughout the different sections of the story. Once again, developers contextualize what the player is witnessing with real life context. The characters may be fictional, yet the events and locations are not. They are part of our collective history. It is impressively surprising that two different developer teams from different companies, almost a decade between them, decided that to deliver their message most effectively, it needed to be tied to the reality with real world elements. I have thought over and over on how to conclude this section of the video and Valiant Hearts. After a while, I realized I couldn't beat what the developers have put out there, so just watch. And for people planning to play the game later, this is your spoilers warning.
After weeks without news of Emile, Marie finally received a letter from her father.
Emile Chaillon. C'est l'heure.
Dearest Marie, as the war ends for me, I have no regrets. I've seen too much horror. I hope fate has been more merciful to you. Our time on Earth is brief, and mine has been filled with so much joy that I can only be thankful for how much I've been blessed, most especially for the wonder you brought into my life. This letter is my last.
I've been found guilty by a military court for the death of an officer. It was not my intention to kill him. War makes men mad. Though I failed Carl, I know my sacrifice has not been in vain. I fought for my country and my liberty. My honor is assured. Since it is the will of God to separate us on earth, I hope we'll meet again in heaven. Keep me in your prayers. Your loving Papa. Always.
Even though their bodies have long since returned to dust, their sacrifice still lives on. We must strive to cherish their memory and never forget.
As I was doing my research for this essay, I learned that this was a real letter. Couldn't have said it better. War makes men mad. Emil's story starts with the goal of reuniting his family, while his story ends with a tragic final walk. Yet, every character in Valiant Hearts has a reason to be there, a reason that is humane and passionate enough to drive them and you forward on the road to the end. Whether it's Anna's search for her father or Freddy's quest for justice and revenge, their struggle has a clear moral direction. They are moving towards something clear. In both Valiant Hearts and World at War, characters within them had a mission to complete. However, for many affected by war, the things are not that clear. In their stories, the only objective is about surviving under uncertainty and destruction. That luxury of clear objective and mission is stripped away from these people, and this war of mine portrays their struggle of survival within the architectural skeletons of a besieged city. The most frightening aspect of war is that for lots of people there is no humane, overwhelming reason to drive people to a certain happy ending. For them, war is all about the agonizing, static effort of survival until a better future that is uncertain to come. So far, we have discussed how war is immoral and how it erodes people's compassion towards one another, surrounded by the screams of the mob. Both the previous games have touched upon that immorality and ferocious nature of war. However, this war of mine takes it a step further. How far are you willing to go in order to survive a war that you are no participant in? In the previous two entries, the story is told within a certain structure. In World at War, we are just another soldier within the Soviet swarm with limited responsibility for our actions. In Valiant Hearts, actions are justified through personal motivation and narrative context. Meanwhile, in this war of mine, there's nothing similar to be found. The only information that is given to you is the overall condition of your fellow survivors and the resources required to sustain them while building your shelter to be a livable space. Every action and decision we take is our own responsibility. So, in accordance with those needs, what are you willing to do? When you have a severely injured or seriously ill person among your little group, how are you planning to provide them with the medication and the bandages they need? Are you willing to risk your life infiltrating one of the military strongholds to steal from, or are you going to steal from an elderly couple in the middle of the night? If you condone stealing no matter the circumstances, are you willing to risk the life of your fellow friend with the hope that the occasional trader visit happens soon, or you find those medical supplies in a totally random, forgotten place. Are you willing to risk your own well-being to help some enslaved prostitutes escape from several bandits on your own? Are you willing to risk your life to help a man that has been shot by a sniper that is trying to shoot you at that moment? These are not only hypothetical questions, these are the scenarios that this war of mine presents the player with. The brilliant execution of the developers while asking this question is there is no right answer or an obvious one that is represented to you. There are actions and there are equal and opposite reactions. You might steal from the elderly people and save your people's lives, however, they may feel too guilt-ridden because of it to see the end of the war. They might get torn apart by the mental wounds much before they get torn apart by the physical ones. You might not steal from anyone and lose a friend and then try to keep people alive who are going through the grief. You might risk your life trying to steal from more sinister members of your society, however, what happens if you die? Would the others be able to survive on their own? These outcomes and interactions are not isolated incidents that the game shows you once and moves on from. This war of mine is structured in a way that the player and the characters carry the weight of every minute decision on their shoulders forward. The consequences of your actions persist through the condition of your group and the state of your shelter. This is where the game design shines through, as it does not operate within a traditional reward and punishment system. Whatever your action might be, it is not considered right or wrong, nor is there an optimal moral path. Instead, what you have ahead of yourself is a set of circumstances where every decision has a cost, and that cost is ever apparent throughout the game. If you decide to go with the approach of survival above all else and take from vulnerable people, the effects of that decision does not end at the moment you gather the resources. It affects how your group functions, how they perceive themselves, and how they react to future situations. Characters may feel depressed and even broken so much that moving forward becomes meaningless for them, affecting everyone in your group. On the other side of the coin, if you attempt to be morally right, you are not rewarded with the good points. Instead, you have to deal with scarcity, worsening conditions, and ever persistent risk of losing someone. This is where this war of mine connects itself to reality as much as the two previous entries does. In real war conditions, especially for civilians trapped within besieged cities, decisions are rarely made within a clear moral or strategic framework. Access to resources is limited, information is either incomplete or non-existent, and the immediate priority is just surviving one more night. People are often forced into these situations where every available option carries a cost and where inaction might be damaging as much as an action. The game reflects this reality by removing any external element that could justify or contextualize your decision. There is no commanding officer, no narrative framing that tells you what should or must be done. Instead, the player is left in a position where the only reference point is the condition of your group and the immediate circumstances that need to be dealt with. This is what makes the experience particularly effective. It is not asking the player to observe or interpret these conditions from a distance, but to operate within them and to deal with the consequences over time, just like people do in these circumstances. Just like some parents had to go through in these circumstances, the Little Ones DLC pushes the weight of these decisions even further. What happens when the people depending on you are children? Children in war stories are often used symbolically. They exist in the background as a reminder of innocence or how even that innocence can be manipulated. However, in Little Ones, they are essentially on the forefront of the story. The game mechanics are not changed drastically. You still scavenge for food, medicine, and materials. You still manage hunger, sickness, depression, and so on. Yet the presence of children changes the whole ordeal and decision-making process entirely. Children in this war of mine are not toughened survivors, they are simply kids. They do not grasp fully what is happening around them. They have simple questions, they get bored just like any other children, and they get scared and require an adult's comfort. The brilliance of the DLC lies in how it transforms the previously asked moral questions into more complex ones. Failing to gather enough food no longer means that an adult goes hungry for a day anymore. It's a kid we are talking about. If you don't steal that medicine, how long will that kid's fragile body be able to resist and fight off the disease? Even scavenging in the night has some emotional burdens, as you might need to leave a children on its own for a whole night in a besieged city. Or even worse, something might happen to you and they will need to stay alive on their own. This was the most influential change this DLC has brought into the game, in my opinion. Because deciding to scavenge is the norm and expected within the first story. The moral decision is where to do it. But now, even deciding to scavenge has its own moral consequences and emotional weight. In this video, I focused on a singular aspect that ties these three beautiful art pieces together, which is that the war is the ultimate theft of human agency. Throughout this essay, we have watched how video games uniquely capture this theft. In Call of Duty World at War, the individual is entirely consumed by the collective. You are a cog, swept up in a tidal wave of historical vengeance where your personal objections means nothing against the gravity of the mob. In Valiant Hearts, this theft looks like a border drawn on a map or a conscription order that forces a peaceful man into a muddy trench. These people are not trying to win a war, they are frantically trying to reclaim the agency that was stolen from them. However, this war of mine does deliver the finest message of all. It gives you said agency back and only shows you that, in the middle of a war zone, agency is not something to be desired. When your world is reduced to rubble, the only choices that can be made are agonizing ones. Steal and live with the guilt, or starve and live with the grief. The game puts you in a moral vacuum where every exercise of free will challenges your own humanity. While I chose these three games to analyze due to their craftsmanship and overall success, together all of these developers have used their medium to contradict the illusion of heroism and portray the reality of war and the weight of these choices and moments. These developers echo an important message of human history. They built these digital monuments, manifestos, whatever you want to call them, to remind us of the true cost of the conflict. I certainly do not claim to stand on the same pedestal as the creative minds and artists who created these masterpieces. I am just a person analyzing their work, and I am simply here to leave a simple flower at the steps of their great work, and I hope you appreciated it. As long as there are those willing to plunge the world back into the habit of destruction, we must keep echoing the message of these people who remind us of what is truly lost in the rubble. Never again.
War is an easy thing to talk about. There are not many people of the generation that remember it. The right honourable gentleman served with distinction in the last war. I never killed anyone, but I wore uniform. But I was in London in the Blitz in 1940, living in the Millbank Tower where I was born. Some different ideas have come in since. And every night I went down to the shelter in Thames House. Every morning I saw Dockland burning. 500 people were killed in Westminster one night by a landmine. It was terrifying. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? What fools we are to live in a generation for which war is a computer game for our children and just an interesting little Channel 4 news item. Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now, that's for their decision to take. But this is a quite unique debate in my parliamentary experience, where we're asked to share responsibility for a decision we won't really be taking, with consequences for people who have no part to play in the brutality of the regime which we are dealing with. And I finish with this. On October the 24th, 1945, and the former Prime Minister from Bexley Old Sidcup will remember it, the United Nations Charter was passed. And the words of that charter are etched into my mind and move me even as I think of them. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save future generations, succeeding generations, from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has caused untold suffering to mankind. That was the pledge of that generation to this generation, and it would be the greatest betrayal of all if we voted to abandon the Charter and take unilateral action and pretend we were doing it in the name of the international community. And I shall vote against the motion for the reasons that I've given the House.